Okay, Q methodology. Taxonomic classification, fundamental to all science activity. Deriving categories in terms of products that observers use to express outcomes of observations. This is usually expressed in terms of frequency, also duration, essentially physical dimensions of the products, behavioral products typically. Traditional problem with taxonomic classification is that physical scales per se do not capture complete classifications of psychological events. Here's an example. It snowed last night. This is an objective description of an event. I enjoy the snow is a subjective example of a description of an event. Those are taken from some work done by Stevenson in 53, 61, and then 82. Q methodology derives order from self-referential statements or a particular person's point of view. Science has not yet developed adequate descriptive categories of the subjective or self-referential or individual phenomenological categories. So as science seeks to classify, to develop solid taxonomies that have, as I say, in many respects, as few categories, as few components of your taxonomy or classification system, the simpler your science is. And many people may think that once you get down to just a few, it's too simplistic. And I know that many feel that way about behavior analytic approaches to behavior, as it does often focus on a very, very, let's say, small component or aspect, physical dimension of behavior. So instead of addressing things like somebody's aggression or road rage, you address the physical characteristic of how many times do you pull out a gun and shoot somebody when you're driving down the freeway. How many times have you been pulled over for, quote unquote, incidents when you're driving around? That has to be on the road. That equals road rage. So it gets to a very more amenable type of datum, meaning that you're able to collect solid information, scientific, the usable information on rate of road rage physical dimensions of behavior. So you don't address road rage ever, in my opinion. You have to address things like number of times that a particular person is involved, again, in incidents, maybe even self-reported. How many times did you get pissed off today when you were driving down the road? How many times did you feel like shooting somebody when you were driving over here today? That kind of thing. How many times did you speed up in anger? How many times did you flip somebody off? Give them the whatever as you're driving by. Okay, so enough said on that, I think. So Q methodology, again, is a set of practices which allows us to extract phenomenological categories through the use of a multivariate analysis. So here's where statistics rubs up against the methodology that we did in class, or that you did as far as the sort with respect to what you think is important to psychology, or what you feel is psychology. And I'll get to that specific exercise in a minute, because I think it's very telling in terms of how you as a group approach psychology, and it helps be able to talk amongst each other, amongst colleagues that are of differing and of the same basic viewpoints, because some of those issues that are some of those things that you were made to sort, or you're forced to sort in this methodology, no matter how many things you're given, they need to be sorted. That's what the exercise is, and it's good. As I mentioned, it's very good in clinical psychology because you can push people along some avenues they may not want to go by virtue of the things you make them sort, the sentences, the phrases, the pictures, whatever it may be, because the actual things you sort can be of a variety of content. They could be smells, etc. It all just depends on developing a method that will allow you for people to tell you which category they should be in, if it's a smell or something like that. Sounds, hearing tests kind of go down with the potential for a Q methodology. Like high pitches and low pitches, tell me if it's high and low, and you have to do this kind of thing when you're testing your hearing. Okay, the outcome that you get is a factor or structure reflecting these phenomenological categories. And again, the example I'll try to display here in a minute, but I'll send along an example of that sort along with this video. Assumptions for extracting factors. So here's where factor analysis is going to come into Q methodology, and that would be the next thing that I would watch, would be the factor analysis video. Following assumptions directly reflect the assumptions underlying quantum theory. Meaning may only emerge from our operations on events. Quantum theory radically different from traditional objective operations thought to isolate the characteristics of events, devoid of all human, or in other words, subjective, devoid of subjective contamination. So assumption number one, subjectivity is inseparable from conditions of measurement. Okay, so the description of a phenomenon and the phenomenon itself, it's a double-headed arrow, meaning that they're one and the same. Assumption two, the observer is an inherent participant in measurement. You can't get away from being the researcher when you're doing research. That's just no matter how blind you want to make your study or how many controls you have in it. The fact of the matter is that you have to be involved in it, and so your interpretation of the data, the decisions you make to graph it, it's where a lot of people want to invoke or to bring into the room the discussion of things like subconscious, because you may decide to graph the data using a particular scale of measurement that makes the results appear more appear larger than they are. We talked a little bit about that kind of illusory kind of manipulation of data to make it look like there's something important there, and there may not be. Okay, so again, the observer and the events themselves, double-headed arrow, much like the description of and the phenomena themselves. So you're the describer. So if the description is double-headed arrow with the phenomena you're just trying to describe, those are called the events when you describe a particular one. And you are the observer when you're doing the description. Measurements are measurement operations and measurement outcomes, also intricately tied to each other. Your ruler and what you say has to do with inches or centimeters, whatever. And so your outcomes are going to be reflected in inches and so forth. And if you have a bad measuring tool, your outcomes will also reflect that. Judgmental rotations, structuring of items, conditions of instructions, and subjective categories. So these are three conditions that are also double-headed arrow with subjective categories. Quantum, intermediate principle. Examples, speed and location or wave-particle duality. So essentially speed and location influence, I guess, in quantum physics, if you observe some phenomena, events in that field in a particular way, in one way it looks like a wave particle, and in another way it looks like something else. It's an atom or something. I don't know exactly what the two are, and I apologize for that. But essentially, what that example is used as a lot of people use that basic example. Is to bring this point up, is that when you are the observer and you're in a different point, or you're looking at it from a different point of view, the events that you describe, the way you describe those events, are going to be different. And you may even just by going like this be able to, it's just way different. And astigmatism is an example. Letters just don't look right until you fix the way that they're oriented, and then children or whoever has the astigmatism can see the letter E, let's just say, for example. Otherwise they can't. So depending on the event, aspects of the event and the observer in that double-headed arrow aspect, it changes the event itself. It changes what the observer sees, so therefore it changes your description of the phenomenon. See how all those things are tied together? It's very important for the interpretation of events when you're looking at your psychological life and when you're trying to interpret other people's in a clinical setting. Assumption 3, factors begin with concourse are indeterminate and are all assumed by the specificity principle. So knowing and the known, again, are intricately tied to each other. And